I've always been a thinker, and I come from a long line of thinkers. Let's put it that way. Um, one of my first moments where I realized the Jehovah's Witnesses can't explain everything was I don't know if you remember this, but in school, they would like open up the gymnasium and they would have like star demonstrations. They would like this is in Arizona. I don't know if you ever saw this, but they would like put up a tent and then like project the stars onto the inside of this tent in the gym. And it's dark and you have like pillows and stuff in there. This was happening when I was like maybe second grade. And they start talking about the sun. And they're like, just so you know, like the sun is going to burn out and run out of energy at some point, maybe in like 4 billion years. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, like, how is this going to work with paradise? Because if we're supposed to be living on Earth forever, it can't actually be forever because it'll only be 4 billion years, until our sun burns out. So if that's the case, how is this going to work? Like we're going to have to go off world some way. We can't live on this planet for more than 4 billion years. It's just impossible. We're going to have to either figure out how to resuscitate the sun or we're going to have to move solar systems and find a new sun. But then I'm like, but this is like this is a science fiction thing that we're talking about. Like we would be the aliens on other planets at that point. Like we just became aliens. So I'm like 6, 8 years old having these thoughts, and I'm going to my mom, and she's just like, "You're thinking too much about it, dude. Like you're overthinking this for sure." And I'm like, "I don't think I am, because really, if we're gonna live forever on Earth and the sun's gonna burn out, we have a finite amount of time here, mom." That was the start of my questioning, and it never ended.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today we have a special guest, and it's special because he's also into podcasting. He has his own badass podcast, and I'll let him introduce it. But today we have our guest, Trent. Trent, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you, man. I'm doing good. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And I would like to ask you if you can tell the audience what is the name of your podcast and what is it all about?
So I co-host the Culture Pod, and my host is Derek. I'm Trinity Herrera. Derek Duvall is my co-host, and essentially, we both came from the Jehovah's Witness faith. We were both pretty much born in, and we practiced for between like 28 and 35 years or so. We left, and over the next 7 years or so of us leaving, me and him were there for each other the whole time. And we wanted to talk about our experience with more people because we had other people reaching out to us all the time. And so the idea was born of starting the Culture Pod, a place to talk about, anyone who's come from a high control group telling their story as a human without necessarily getting into, I mean, we do talk about a lot of dogma and doctrine and stuff like that, but it's not really there to pick apart, each cult. It's really to focus on the human and the human story that each person walks away with when they leave one of these cults.
So I wanted to focus first before getting into your personal story into the podcast because it's very fascinating, and there are quite a few cult podcasts, but each and every one has their own individual style. And so you and Derek, my question is, how did it even come into your heads to start a podcast?
Well, I got to say it was Derek's brainchild. He's the one that really wanted to do it. He's very people and human focused, as am I, but he also has a desire to go into psychology and counseling and therapy. And so basically we realized that there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of stories of people who have left the JW faith, the Jehovah's Witnesses. But then there's even more that have come out of, Mormonism or high control Southern Baptist groups or even non-religious cults. Like even some MLMs and other groups can be cultish. So really it was formed just because we wanted to capture the humanity and we felt, we both kind of wanted to fight the man, I think,
Mm.
without going directly against, each cult specifically. We thought the best way we could do that is literally just to let people talk about their experience, and that would do the work for us, helping other people just by sharing the story, sharing the experience, and then helping to expose what really goes on within these cult groups.
Something that really catches my attention is, getting into the humanity is what you're, getting into. Of course, understanding a bit of the doctrine, the dogmas, but you're not really attacking that. You're really just kind of unraveling what the human experience for, these people are, these people who have left the cult. Uh, what was what was it like, the experience uh, being inside of a cult as a person? And I ask this, and keep in mind, what I have in my mind is from my own cult experience, because what happened in our cult experience is that we were trained to be like robots. But once I and other members from the cult that I was in, I feel that we were I mean, it was almost like a fear or just like not an understanding how to be a human again.
Yeah.
So my question for you is like, what have you like discovered from interviewing people as they've left a high control cult?
So much. I mean, so much. So like your first question, what was it like for me? It runs the gamut of human experience. At certain points I felt like the most special person in the world. I felt like the most connected to God person in the world. I felt holy. But then on the other side of the coin, I've never felt more shame. I've never felt more guilt. I've never felt more sinful. And that's like the coin flip, depending on the day, a coin could flip and I'd be feeling any one of those emotions, especially being raised in it. Now, like what I've seen from people coming out of cults is also just an even wider range. Your experience when you came on our pod was really incredible because you're like a man of faith who's wanting to serve God, who's wanting to serve God in the highest capacity, but then sort of being led astray by this very imperfect human with these very imperfect ideas. And whenever we talk to people who have come out of cults, their experience usually boils down to power and control being exerted over them psychologically, emotionally, logically, like using logical arguments from texts like the Bible or self-written texts, But almost everyone that we've interviewed, we've done 2 dozen, 3 dozen interviews now. We have so many that we're backlogged for like a month or two on release schedule because there's so many people, and the common thread is power and control being exerted, their agency being taken from them, and being funneled into these behaviors and choices that someone else is dictating.
So from your personal experiences and from what you've also studied, talking to other people, is there a shortcut to regaining one's individuality, do you think, or does it have to be a long process?
It does not have to be a long process. From what I've seen in the healing process, the thing that takes the longest, I think, is regaining your agency, your ability as a human to start making choices for yourself. The sooner you can do that, the sooner the healing journey starts. Because what happens, is like, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses, they rule by fear. Almost every witness that we've interviewed has anxiety, depression, existential dread because from a young age, we're taught that God's going to destroy the entire world and you better do right by God or you're going to be with him. That can cause people to lose their agency. They live by anxiety, they live by in fear and they live by that. But for me and Derek both, we were able to reclaim our agency very quickly. I've always been pretty stubborn. I've always been a survivor. I've always been able to adapt. And as soon as I had that moment where I realized this isn't real, I don't even think God is real, at least not the way I've learned him. This can't be true. I immediately said, I'm taking my life back. And I started making decisions based on wanting to take my life back and my agency back. The pain that that can cause is a whole nother journey.
Mm.
I made a lot of mistakes that I am not proud of today, when I was reclaiming my agency and coming out of that journey. It took me a couple years before I started actually funneling my agency into choices I was proud of. And I think that comes from typically when you're in a cult, you have a belief system, not a value system. And so, you are force-fed these beliefs, and sometimes they focus on values or principles. But once you no longer have the beliefs, you really have to start over on your value system. And that took me years. What are my new values? And in that first year, or two or three, I was a little confused about my values.
So, something you mentioned is about in growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses, there is a lot of fear. That's like the core of the teaching. And I'm not trying. I don't think. Well, for me, I'm not trying to attack, but I like to discuss.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I'm an open book, man. You can ask
so,
me anything.
so they have a lot of fear, and from what I observe, also very similar with the call that I was in. But there's two layers of fear. The first layer that I can think of is the fear of the end of the world. And the second fear is if a person leaves the cult. Now, for the first layer, my what I'm observing is that yes, like the end of the world is going to come, but and this can also go for like evangelicals at times or other Christian denominations who have this culty thinking. It's like they want it to come. They want to see like a chastisement or for everybody else to be punished. They want to see everyone else fail. And with the second layer of fear, the fear of leaving, they will, well, this was my experience. Like the thinking was, if you leave, you're going to be a failure. You're going to be miserable. God is going to punish you. So, with that in mind, because you were saying that, on your journey, you've made some mistakes. When I experienced that on my own journey and I was starting to make mistakes, I was at a time thinking, oh, shoot, should I go back? Is this a sign that really that I'm better there? That, yeah, maybe the end of the world is coming and I'm in the wrong spot. So for you, did you ever experience those kind of thoughts or emotions? And if so, how were you able to navigate through that?
I, I have, and it got worse when I left. So what kind of fear do Jehovah's Witnesses live with? It is a post-apocalyptic or not post-apocalyptic. It's an apocalyptic religion. It's an end times religion, a doomsday religion. They do believe that God is going to, at some point, or Jesus rather, is going to lead the way in destroying the world as we know it and only save those who are innocent, pure, haven't had a chance to learn the Bible, or are currently worshiping God, Jehovah, I should say. Um, that's like the existential fear. But then Jehovah's Witnesses also practice shunning. And I've been what's called disfellowshipped once or twice in my life. And when you're disfellowshipped, no Jehovah's Witness is supposed to talk to you. They've updated that recently, but for the last 100 or 200 years, that's how it's been. And so you always live in fear of your decision making and your mistakes and your sins. So I kid you not, there are certain movies, like if I went to go see Harry Potter as a Jehovah's Witness, That could be a disfellowshipping offense. I could lose my entire family base, my friend base, and all the witnesses that were my friends at the Kingdom Hall. I would no longer be able to comment or participate in meetings or go out in the ministry. I could lose everything that I held dear just because I went to go see a movie about magic. Same with alcohol. I could have one too many beers and make one comment at a party that was out of pocket. Same thing. You're shunned, you lose everything. And so living as a Jehovah's Witness, you're constantly in fear. Now, when I left, I still had the fear, the existential fear of dying. So witnesses believe in what they call paradise. And so God comes and through Jesus wipes out the world, and all that's left are the pure, the sinless, the ones that are serving God. And the second part of that is they spend the next 1,000 years built rebuilding earth into what it should have been in the Garden of Eden. And that's like a beautiful thing to think about. It was always like I would think about paradise and imagine my life there when I went to sleep at night as a form of meditation, my whole life, building houses, restoring nature, living in homeostasis with animals and plants, um, living peacefully among people. Everyone serves God, everyone follows God's rules, no governments. And so I grew up my entire life thinking I would live forever on this paradise earth if I just did right by Jehovah and by the organization. And losing that caused me like the deepest existential dread and fear that I've ever had because I had to confront the fact that when I die, maybe I'm just dead. Maybe I'll never make it to paradise. I'll never have that thing I looked forward to, you know? And then, I'm rebuilding my life. So when I left, I ended up moving to Texas. I separated from my wife. I had like a 1 or 2 year old, 3 year old daughter at the time. And I ended up losing one of my jobs. And I found myself living in a crummy apartment, a 1 bedroom apartment in Fort Worth, Texas, with one lawn chair as my couch, a TV, like a monitor, my computer, my Xbox, and nothing else. And I had just lost my job. I had, a couple grand in savings and maybe rent paid for a month or two. And that was like the single loneliest, most devastating time that I've had in my life, probably. And that was when I was thinking maybe I should just go back. Maybe I went too far. Maybe Satan is cursing me right now. Maybe Jehovah has let Satan attack me because my life could not be worse. And everything they said is true. But then I found after that, I didn't go back. Even though I was scared for everything, I just powered through it. And I said, I kind of had a fuck it moment, like, fuck it, man. I'm here. I'm going to play some video games and order some pizza and think about how I'm going to get my life back on track. And so I ended up finding a great job that I was with for 7 or 8 years. I ended up finding, a new girlfriend, new partners, new friends, and life just evolved from there. So I've experienced the gamut, of feelings and emotions. I almost went back. I wanted to go back. I was tempted to go back, but ultimately I just stayed the course and I've made it here.
How long have you been out for?
I left in 2018.
Okay.
So, 7 years,
Okay. And you were in for like 20, 30 years?
28 years. Yeah.
20, were you
From
born
birth to 28.
from birth? Dang.
Okay. I say birth, but so I was born actually overseas in Germany. My dad was in the army and he's Hispanic. My last name's Herrera. And he was always working. But in Germany, they had Spanish speaking Jehovah's Witnesses going door to door to Spanish speaking last named individuals in Germany. And so they came to my dad's door where my mom was with me, expecting to find a Mexican family, and they find my mom, who's like Gringa of the Year. She's like white from West Virginia, like doesn't speak a lick of Spanish. She's blonde. And so then, they realize, oh, you're not Spanish or Mexican. So they send English speaking people back, missionaries back, and they like became my mom's best friend. It was like one of her only friends there, and she converted. And so I celebrated one or two Christmases and birthdays. After that, when you're a witness, you don't celebrate anything. The only thing you celebrate is Jesus's death. They call it the memorial. Um, so yeah, from like 2.5 to 28, I was deeply in. I was a true believer. I did my best, and Derek was too. We were both like, and I actually met Derek when I was like 7 years old in Flagstaff, Arizona. We were going to the same Kingdom Hall. And then 10 years down the line, when I'm like 18, I ended up being best friends with his wife. We like all hung out again in the congregation. So I was in for 28 years, man.
If you were still in the cult, like let's say we go back in time, and someone were to ask you, "Are you happy?" Do you think you'd be able to honestly say, "Absolutely, I'm super happy"?
Yeah, I had genuine happiness most of the time. And it's a really nuanced thing, because I felt the oppression, I felt the fear, but to me, that all just kind of came with the territory of being a believer. I
Mm.
thought that that's what everyone's experience was. And so I had a personal relationship with God, I prayed a dozen times a day, heartfeltly to God, I went out in the ministry and knocked on doors and shared the good news, which is what they call, their belief system with others. I thought I was having a genuine, you know, good impact on the world around me. And even though I was maybe poor sometimes or bad things were happening, I would just pray to God, lay it all on God, and not worry about it. And sometimes I miss that level of like ignorance,
Mhm.
you know? Like I miss when life was that simple for me. Just pray about it. God will make it happy. God will make it better. And I totally respect that, others and I think yourself are still religious and still are believers. I personally am agnostic now. I think it's like totally possible that God could be real. Like I feel that somehow we arrived here on this planet Earth, right? And there's so many different creation stories in the world and so many like historical flood stories. There's like all these things that lead me to like, I don't know. I just don't know. But what I do know is that like the way I practiced as a Jehovah's Witness would not make me happy anymore.
Well, I think it's very healthy to have an agnostic mind, and to have that honesty with oneself. And I'm not saying to the audience, oh, abandon your religion or abandon all this, but that, when I say agnostic kind of mind, where you're able to question, and questioning isn't rebellion. It's not like the sin of Lucifer. Like they'll say, "Oh, you're questioning. Oh man, bad, bad, bad." They'll wag their finger. But I think it's healthy. I mean, it's part of life where we have to question, especially like in a relationship. You have to have some that personality.
Yeah.
But in your experience, when did it start where because you did have genuine happiness, but you're no longer a Jehovah's Witness? So can you walk us through that journey?
Well, man, there were a couple points where I started to feel happy again not being a Jehovah's Witness. Like the first girlfriend that I had that was not a Jehovah's Witness was really sweet to me, and we're obviously no longer together, but she was great. And I had a lot of moments of like real happiness of where I was like, wow, I'm really free. I can smoke, I can drink, I can, do all these things without fear of her judgment, or God's judgment. I had I mentioned her first, but really the thing that's made me the most happy is my daughter. Because what made me leave the religion ultimately was the birth of my daughter. That's when I realized I love her more than God would ever love me. And I had that realization because I found myself thinking I can forgive her for anything. I would always be in her corner. I would never want her to suffer, the way that humans suffer. And if I had the power, I would prevent all of that. And it was just kind of this huge moment for me where I was like, man, if I would do all that for her, I don't think God loves me the same way. I don't think he really is my father. But I've had all these moments where I'm undoing generational trauma with her. Like, my family is my dad is Hispanic, very machismo, like authoritative. He's also ex-military, ex-law enforcement. I was beaten. I was mentally and verbally and emotionally in every way abused by my dad growing up. And that we've talked on my podcast quite a bit about how Jehovah's Witnesses, especially, like learn how to wear a mask. And you put on the mask when you go to church and when you go to the meetings and stuff, but at home it comes off. And so it was the kind of thing where like he would be the most enigmatic, charismatic, friendly, loving dude there and then come home and beat me with a belt, and curse at me and call me stupid and, all these other things. We have none of that in my house. And it just been there's like leaving behind the curse of the witnesses and letting her form her own ideas. And like here's a for instance. So Jehovah's Witnesses are very anti-holiday. And she had some of those beliefs, instilled in her by like my mom and other people early on. So we're working to unpack all that. And like this Halloween was the first year that we talked about her dressing up and like going trick-or-treating. And she was like, I just feel like if I do that, God will be mad at me. And I'm like, okay, what does it look like? How would you know if God was mad at you for that? And she's like, well, I don't know actually. And I was like, okay, what about the flip side? Like, how would you know if God was happy with you for doing something? And she's like, I don't know. And then I'm like, well, why are you so worried about it then? If you don't know if he's happy and you don't know when he's mad, why worry about it? And I'm glad that she has the opportunity to think about these things and to be free, you know? So just countless moments of happiness with her. She's an artist like me. She's musical and in this art school and all that. I've had I also broke free from alcohol. I live a sober lifestyle, at least California sober. But I had to break free from the curse of alcohol too, which, I realized I was using because I was so depressed and anxious all the time. And so when I left the witnesses, I had a couple moments where I'm like, man, this is harming me, you know? And so she will not grow up with an alcoholic father like I did. Um, and then, I started to have like promotions at work. I became well known in my circles for being a shrewd and intelligent businessman. I achieved a lot of goals, and then I got to start the podcast and I'm with my current partner now, and she's the love of my life. So there's been countless moments and countless reasons to be happy now that are all no longer rooted in, am I making God happy? It's me using my agency to make myself happy in a non-selfish way.
And going back to, your teaching lesson with your daughter, I'm not a parent, but the way you went about it, I mean, you could have approached your daughter for Halloween and said, "There is no God," or even on the other extreme, like the grandmother saying, "Hey, God is mad at you if you celebrate holidays." Those are like two extremes, but you approached it in a way that allows your daughter to really use her own judgment and really to think. And that wasn't taught to us in the cult to think. How was it for you? Like, did you have resources, or were you exposed to maybe certain podcasts or anything that helped you to kind of crack out of that old extreme thinking?
Well, I've always been a thinker, and I come from a long line of thinkers. Let's put it that way. Um, one of my first moments where I realized the Jehovah's Witnesses can't explain everything was I don't know if you remember this, but in school, they would like open up the gymnasium and they would have like star demonstrations. They would like this is in Arizona. I don't know if you ever saw this, but they would like put up a tent and then like project the stars onto the inside of this tent in the gym. And it's dark and you have like pillows and stuff in there. This was happening when I was like maybe second grade. And they start talking about the sun. And they're like, just so you know, like the sun is going to burn out and run out of energy at some point, maybe in like 4 billion years. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, like, how is this going to work with paradise? Because if we're supposed to be living on Earth forever, it can't actually be forever because it'll only be 4 billion years, until our sun burns out. So if that's the case, how is this going to work? Like we're going to have to go off world some way. We can't live on this planet for more than 4 billion years. It's just impossible. We're going to have to either figure out how to resuscitate the sun or we're going to have to move solar systems and find a new sun. But then I'm like, but this is like this is a science fiction thing that we're talking about. Like we would be the aliens on other planets at that point. Like we just became aliens. So I'm like 6, 8 years old having these thoughts, and I'm going to my mom, and she's just like, "You're thinking too much about it, dude. Like you're overthinking this for sure." And I'm like, "I don't think I am, because really, if we're gonna live forever on Earth and the sun's gonna burn out, we have a finite amount of time here, mom." That was the start of my questioning, and it never ended. And essentially, what happened is I forced myself to like turn that off because when it was on, my thoughts became incongruent with being a witness. I stopped turning that off around the time that we got pregnant with my daughter. Because I had to actually really think about like how are we going to raise her? Like what is she going to be raised to believe? What beliefs am I going to press on her versus what are we going to allow her to figure out on her own? And that's where everything started to really crumble. And so then I'm doing all this introspective thinking. And then I remember all these things that I've thought my entire life. And so I actually have a book here I wanted to show you. It's called The Finished Mystery. And this was actually published in 1918. So this was like over 100 years ago. And when you go back and you look at the old Jehovah's Witness literature, it's all completely different. I mean, this book is crazy. It's full of like Freemasonry logos and symbols and symbology and end times doomsday stuff. I went back and I started researching some of the old stuff, and then I realized, man, like this old stuff is way different than the new stuff that we're getting. So they've completely changed over the course of 100 years. And you can totally get disfellowshipped for looking at what they call apostate material, anything that's published that's anti-witness. So I again had this fuck it moment where I'm like, I'm going to start doing extracurricular research on Jehovah's Witnesses. And I found the XJW subreddit on Reddit. And as soon as I hit that subreddit, I had like I had a fuck feeling because consuming that content was incredibly validating. It was like, holy shit, I'm not the only one. They're talking about the same things I've always thought of. That's really the crack that led me down this whole path.
So were you able to connect with a lot of ex-JWs after you left the cult, or did it take a while to connect?
So the first person that I tried to connect with while I was in was Derek. So I had this moment with Derek in 2018. I had grown a beard, which at the time was another offense. It was like really looked down on. They had taken all my privileges. And so Derek came over and was like expressing concern, like, hey, I'm worried about you and your relationship with God, like he was being a good brother, And I finally was just like, bro, this ain't it. Like, I've done all this research. Here's the stuff that I'm finding. How could this be God's real religion if I'm growing this beard and being shunned? This is what the scribes and Pharisees were doing to the Jews at the time when Jesus came. They had all these rules that made it so hard. Me and Derek had a huge argument and had a huge falling out. We didn't talk to each other anymore. I ended up moving to Texas. And a year later, he was the first XJW that I really connected with because he called me and I was like, oh shit, here's the phone call. And he's like, dude, I'm out. I'm finally out, and filled me in on everything that he had learned. Since then, we've connected with like 24 to 30-ish ex-JWs and ex cult members. I've tried to do like in-person meetups locally for ex-JWs, but it's just you really have to have someone like organize the whole event, tell everyone the date and time to show up and you have to have someone like do the whole thing. That's what I'm about to start doing because it's like every other day there's a post, "Hey, we should meet up, we should do this," and it just fizzles out. Online, I've interacted probably with hundreds, of XJWs, but I can't say I have a huge community, The community for me is the people that I've known in the past that are out, which there's a half dozen of them, and people we've interviewed and some online communities.
So for those of us like me who doesn't really know much about the theology of the JWs, what is the purpose of the no beards? You said that they've kind of changed a bit, but for the longest time it was like it was frowned upon. What's up with that?
So there's a scripture where Jesus says, I think it was Jesus said, be no part of this world. And they take that extremely literally. In fact, they call anyone who's not a witness worldly. They are part of the world. And the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one, Satan. So anyone who's not a witness is worldly. And the rationale was there's these principles from the 50s and 60s witness literature that says we need to be clean cut, well groomed, and well arranged. And essentially, it came down to people in biker gangs have beards, drug addicts have beards, punks, and skinheads have beards. Why would you want to be associated with someone like that? And would you want to be at the door knocking on a door and scare some old lady with your beard that could turn her off from the message of God? This is like the I just did a series on TikTok of the bite model,
Mhm.
and this is like everything I just mentioned is classic bite model. Like they're trying to influence your behavior, um, your thoughts, your emotions, like they did mental gymnastics for everything they do. But that's what it comes down to. It's a sign of rebellion. They still remember the 70s, whenever the 60s to 70s transition where everyone's like clean cut coming out of the 50s. Then you go into the 70s and it's like ZZ Top and beards. So it's like it was just an optics thing,
So
you
is
know.
having a beard seen as like sinful, evil?
It was seen as a sign of spiritual weakness.
So okay, hold on. So I've seen there's like a magazine, the Watchtower, is that it?
Yeah, the Watchtower and Awake magazines, yeah.
Like I've only seen like one. I was at someone's house and they were like, "Hey, someone brought me this." This is like 20 years ago. And there's like like little, not cartoons, but like the little like illustrations and stuff.
Yeah.
Did they ever make illustrations of Jesus?
Yeah, and this is part of the problem, right? They show Jesus and the apostles as wearing beards all the time. They illustrated them in every Watchtower, and every time you see Jesus, he has a beard. Anytime you see God, he's represented with a beard. All of the apostles have a beard. And then there, and I would literally be like, listen, like we're portraying Jesus and his apostles as having beards, and then it's frowned on for me to have one. What's with that? And they're like, well, it was a different time. This is thousands of years ago. Of course he had a beard back then, but today it's different. And so they had a reason for everything, man.
Yeah, I'll avoid getting into like a rabbit hole on that because it sounds very culturally influenced and
Yeah.
um yeah, that's because it's very interesting. I mean, the contradiction that we're seeing of the portrayal of you know, I don't know if Jehovah see Jesus as the Messiah or if they see him as God, but at least as a prophet, I assume. And to make these drawings or illustrations of him, of God, of the apostles with a beard, but now saying, it's okay back then. If that's the case, then, and not only for Jehovah's Witnesses, but for any group, you can change the goalposts whenever you want, whenever
Yeah.
anything isn't convenient. So that's a very unfortunate, because the beard looks super cool on you, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I'm glad I kept it. And what's really funny is they did move the goalpost maybe 6 months ago or a year ago now.
Oh,
And for me, when I grew a beard back in 2015 to 2018, I was having elders come to my home, like in pairs, to counsel me and show concern over me. I was like, my friends were starting to not hang out with me. I stopped being invited to events. I wasn't able to raise my hand and comment, or read the Bible from the stage or anything. And it basically it made it easier for me to just say, bye, I'm done. I haven't changed at all. I just have a beard and yet I'm being publicly, shunned. But then now, brothers are going door to door with beards, and it's totally fine. Members of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses all have beards now. And it's like the goalpost moving literally cost them, I would say, hundreds of thousands of followers over the course of the last 10 years. Because that's just one area, but they constantly move the goalposts. And it's just crazy. I
uh,
think we talk a lot, me and Derek, and we think that if they had kept the belief system from the 90s and just left it, they would actually be twice as big as they are now. But the goalpost moving wears people out.
yeah. And I don't, you know, as I mentioned before, I try to respect everyone's faith or beliefs, go ahead. But something like that, I mean, as a former cult member, although it was another cult, I would see the goalposts changing and moving, and it's like, okay, like, come on, it's like this is getting a bit ridiculous. You're just doing that because, and they had their reasons, but their reasons didn't make sense. It's like, come on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses did that with their Bible too. So the New World Translation, I think, came out in the 80s. I think it was 86. And it was actually a decent translation. Like there were some studies done on it, and in some ways it was a very accurate, well translated Bible. And at the time, at that time in the 90s ish, they were very focused on like deep Bible knowledge. They were training us with like question and answers and deeply studying the Bible. And it was actually the most enjoyable time that I was a witness because it was like scholarly. It felt like seminary every day that you went to your meeting. And then in like the mid maybe 2010s, they came out with a new revised New World Translation, and it was like dumbed down. They changed a lot of things and it made it sound and translated it completely differently. And then they moved the goalpost again. They're like, well, the other one we did was too accurate and it was hard to understand. So now we've made it more simple. But in doing so, they changed the meaning of hundreds and thousands of key scriptures that I had memorized. So it was very interesting. I think they lost a lot of people when they did that too, because how can you change the Bible? Like the King James Version has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years untouched?
Well, it's like saying Shakespeare. I mean, I haven't read Shakespeare in a long ass time, but I remember like in the bottom there's all these like footnotes so you can understand. Imagine if uh, they just started just making it dumbed like a dumbed down version.
Yep.
It removes like so much of the beauty behind it. And I'm not saying, hey, the Bible's beautiful all in all. I mean, there's some crazy stories in there. But yeah, to like dumb it down, I don't know. I said,
Yeah.
what would be the reason? What was I think you said it, but like what was like if it was already good as it was?
Um, it's hard to say. Like, I do think so. This was around the same time that they rebranded and they never had a website for the longest time. They released the new Bible, they released a website, and they silently started removing a lot of their stuff from their library. So, like, they always had the Watchtower library on CD-ROM. You could load it up. This is like when floppy disks or like computer disks and stuff were being used, but you could load it up and have access to every work that they had ever done. Then they moved to an online library, and all of a sudden, half of the old stuff was just gone. Like some of the stuff that I used to read, like the finished mystery, this book right here, gone. Um, so they launched the Bible, they launched jw.org, then they start doing videos. And what we think happened is that they had a consulting firm come in, or they had their own advisory boards say what we're doing isn't working. They had attrition. They like used to always publish the baptized numbers and the total publisher numbers in each country. Around that same time, they stopped doing that. So what we're thinking is they saw a decline in numbers. They saw a decline in field service or ministry time, and they saw the advent of the internet and the effect that it was going to have on people. And so they dumbed it all down so that they could like broaden their audience, and
Mm,
bring more people in the way that people are used to going to church, videos, simplistic Bible teachings. They stopped having like deep Bible discussion and just did kind of light fluff type stuff. So like the whole vibe changed. I think they realized they needed to make it way easier to keep people in and bring people in.
okay. Well, man, it's been just an interesting journey to hear about uh, for yourself and also the journey that Jehovah was the I don't know what to call it, organization or religion, what they've been going through with the rebranding and just the changes. But for you, like, how do you see the Jehovah's Witnesses evolving in the future? Do you see it remaining consistent, or do you think it's still going to be rebranding ever so often?
I If I had to pull out my crystal ball, which I could get disfellowshipped for, because that's practicing magic, but if I had to pull out my crystal ball, I would say that, like every other pretty much major religion, they're going to continue to see a decline in numbers. When you look at stats for like Gen Z, it's completely flipped. It used to be like 30% of people were non-religious. Now it's like 30% of people are religious with Gen Z. And there's like the world is a much different place than it was 30 years ago in the 90s. In the 90s, we were still living in excess. People had reasons to feel hopeful and all this stuff. The world we're living in today, millennials and Gen Z have watched their parents, turn into baby boomers, and maybe they're doing well, but a lot of the people that are millennials and Gen Z, like they do not have much hope. There's not much, eh, and there's not much hope that religion can offer. Like religion doesn't help you pay your bills. It doesn't help you with your rent, doesn't help you with your student loans. It might make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, but whenever you live in a prosperous time, you have time and energy to spare praising and worshiping God. But I don't think we're in such a prosperous time as we have been in the past. So that, along with the internet and the kind of stuff we're doing, I mean, like my podcast is become a part of this movement where we're informing people as to what it's actually like being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. We're in SEO results now online, like people will see our stuff come up on Instagram, TikTok, and we're just one of many.
Mhm.
So I think that they're going to see a continuous decline, like every other major religion, which continues to be on the decline.
So for someone who's listening, because I mean, cults in general, I hope that they do decline and people get out. So eventually, every day people are leaving. What advice do you have for a person who may be listening right now and they have just left any cult? What advice would you give them?
Well, first, I want to say not every religion is a cult. Not every cult is a religion. And so, like in your instance, we talked about, you left a cult, but not necessarily a religion, and that's rare. Um, so I would make that distinction. We all have a different spiritual need to a different level, and how we get that filled, hopefully does no harm to others, including yourself. As far as advice for somebody who is leaving a cult, it's going to be okay. That's something I had to tell myself all the time. Like, it's going to be okay. It's going to work itself out. It's going to be fine. Uh, Reclaim your agency as soon as you can. Like, it's okay to make mistakes when you're doing that. Um, Stay humble. There's like when you do leave a cult, there's a lot to learn. You're relearning life, you're relearning yourself. Stay kind, especially to yourself, because, a lot of cults will cause you to beat yourself up, to
Mm.
have guilt and shame and all these feelings. So I was extra kind to myself, and I found that to help. And find your people, people who are going to be the influence that you need and the support that you need. And, if they're the opposite of that, if you find that people are hurting you, it's okay to cut people out these days.
Yeah.
But I would say reclaiming your agency as quick as you can is probably the singular most helpful thing I can think of.
Well, thank you so much. That's some great advice, especially not only if a person has just left the cult, but even if they're, years out of the cult, because, and I've spoken about this a bit on TikTok, that there are, I mean, yes, I'm physically out, but I only really got out once I was mentally out, and that took a longer
Yeah.
process. But hearing your advice, I think that's very essential. And we're coming to a close. But before we do, can you remind us again about your podcast and where can people in the audience listen?
So we are the Culture Pod, cult.ture, cult.ture. We're pretty much everywhere these days. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and on as far as podcasting goes, we have our links in our socials, but we're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a few others too. So if you find us on social, if you find us on, Instagram or TikTok, you'll find our links, but you can find us on anywhere you can listen to major podcasts.
Thank you so much. And for the folks listening, please go ahead and give a follow to their podcast. Give it a listen, give it a rating, give it a 5 stars. You better give it a 5 stars. And well, if you want, also for my podcast, please give it a 5 stars. I've received quite a few 1 stars every now and then, but that's part of podcasting. You take that
Yeah, it's part
risk.
of it.
But now that we're coming to a close, I ask each guest the same question, and that is for you, Trent. What is your truth that heals?
So I was thinking about this because I know you asked this, and for me, it was actually the truth that healed me, right? And so I had been told what truth was my whole life. In fact, the witnesses call their belief system the truth. Your friends are in the truth, right? That's what they call it. And it was actually learning real truth that set me free. Um, I learned about the truth of the bite model, how, behavior, information, thoughts, emotions are used to control people. I learned about Darvo, deny, attack, reverse, offender, and victim. Um, just those two things alone helped me so much. And then I learned the real truth that, like the witnesses talk about how everyone aside from witnesses are worldly. Well, that is the whole world. It's actually Jehovah's Witnesses that are witnessy, you know?
Mhm.
So I guess I have to say that, like, actually seeing through the lies, seeing through to the fact that, like, we are all one big human family. We're just messy and we follow different religions. Seeing that we shouldn't control each other, that we should live in harmony with each other. Um, that's what actually healed me, like learning real truth and figuring out what that was for me.
Well, thank you so much, Trent, for sharing your truth that heals. And for those of you in the audience, please go ahead and subscribe, give a follow. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple, please give the stars. That'd be great. And if you would like to share this podcast, please do, because our guest today, Trent, and every guest, they share an amazing truth that heals. And I really especially enjoyed today's episode, as I myself am a cult survivor. So please go ahead and share this episode. And if you would like to support me in other ways, you may do so and buy me a coffee, as that always helps me to stay caffeinated, stay awake, and helps me to keep on going forward. So you may do so by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/truth7. And again, to Trent, thank you so much for being an awesome guest here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thanks for having me.